A violent wind tears through a mountain valley. It blows straight into one army's face. Arrows and dust turn back against the throwers. Shields become useless against the sudden gale. Men on both sides believe the gods are speaking. One side prays to Christ for victory. The other still prays to Jupiter and Hercules. By nightfall, one empire's old religion will be finished. This is the Battle of the Frigidus. By the late 4th century, Rome was already fractured. It was split into eastern and western halves. Each half had its own ruling emperor. Managing an empire this vast alone was nearly impossible. In 392, the Western Emperor Valentinian II died suddenly. Some said it was suicide, born of despair. Others believed his own general had him killed. That general was a Frankish warlord named Arbogast. Arbogast held real power but could not claim the throne himself. He was not of Roman blood and knew it. Roman law and tradition barred him from ruling directly, so he installed a puppet emperor instead. His name was Eugenius, a former teacher and official. Eugenius was Christian in name but not in conviction. He needed allies, and Rome's old pagan aristocracy offered them. To win their support, Eugenius made a symbolic gesture. He restored the altar of victory to the Senate. This pagan monument had been removed years earlier. Its return outraged devout Christians across the empire. Old temples slowly reopened under his tolerant rule. Pagan imagery reappeared openly in public life again. To many, this looked like a genuine religious revival. In the East, Emperor Theodosius I watched with growing anger. He was a fiercely devout, uncompromising Christian ruler. He saw Eugenius not just as a rival, he saw him as a threat to Christian Rome itself. He began quietly preparing for a war of religion. Theodosius spent months building an enormous multi-ethnic army. Roman legions marched alongside Gothic warriors and allied tribes. Among his commanders was a young Gothic leader named Alaric. Few yet knew this same man would later sack Rome. Feeding and moving such a diverse army was difficult. Loyalties among his barbarian allies were often shaky at best. At one banquet, rival Gothic factions nearly turned violent. A drunken quarrel ended with one leader killing another. Still, Theodosius held his fragile coalition together through sheer will. In the spring of 394, he finally marched west. His route crossed the brutal terrain of the Balkans. Supply lines stretched dangerously thin across hostile territory. Morale wavered, but Theodosius pressed forward regardless of hardship. He understood this campaign was more than politics. To him, it was a holy war for Christendom. Meanwhile, Eugenius and Arbogast prepared their own defense carefully. They chose a narrow valley along the Frigidus River. Steep mountains rose on either side of the water. This terrain naturally limited how an attacker could maneuver. Arbogast ordered his men to fortify the position heavily. Trenches were dug, palisades raised, and artillery positioned carefully. By late August, both massive armies had arrived. Theodosius camped along the river's eastern bank. Eugenius held the fortified western side directly opposite him. Neither ruler could avoid the coming confrontation any longer. Everyone understood what this battle truly represented. On September 5th, Theodosius ordered the first assault. He sent his barbarian allies across the freezing river first. Visigoths and Alans charged forward with fierce determination. But Eugenius's men were dug in and ready. They had spent weeks preparing trenches and defensive works. Arrows, javelins, and stones rained down mercilessly. The narrow valley funneled attackers directly into kill zones. Cold water and slippery banks slowed every desperate advance. Casualties mounted quickly among the exposed foederati troops. Some accounts describe as many as 10,000 dead. Among the fallen was Theodosius's own trusted general, Bacurius. By dusk, the assault had completely failed to break through. Theodosius's army had suffered a brutal, humiliating setback. His officers reportedly urged him to consider retreat. That night, Arbogast sensed a chance for total victory. He dispatched troops through the mountains under cover of darkness. Their mission was to circle behind Theodosius's exposed army. If successful, they would seal off his only escape route. Trapped between two forces, Theodosius's army would be finished completely. Arbogast reportedly celebrated, certain the war was already won. But something unexpected happened deep in those mountain passes. The detachment sent to trap Theodosius suddenly changed sides. Whether through bribery, faith, or fear, they defected instead. By morning, they had joined Theodosius's camp completely. News of this reached Theodosius just before dawn broke. His mood shifted instantly from despair toward renewed confidence. Encouraged by this stunning reversal, Theodosius ordered a second assault. His weary troops advanced once more into the valley. Eugenius, confident after the previous day's victory, held his ground. His men still occupied strong, fortified defensive positions. For a while, the battle seemed evenly matched again. Then, according to ancient accounts, the weather itself intervened. A violent, sudden windstorm swept down through the valley. It blew directly into the faces of Eugenius's soldiers. Dust and debris blinded men trying desperately to see. Their own javelins and arrows were blown backward instead. Shields became nearly useless against the howling, relentless gale. Christian writers later called this clear divine intervention. Whatever the true cause, the effect was devastating. Eugenius's line, already exhausted, began to waver badly. Sensing the shift, Theodosius pushed his advantage immediately. His troops surged forward through the chaos and confusion. Eugenius's soldiers, blinded and demoralized, began breaking formation entirely. Panic spread rapidly through the Western army's exhausted ranks. Soldiers who had held firm the day before now fled. Arbogast tried desperately to rally his collapsing forces. It was already far too late to matter. Eugenius himself was captured in the growing chaos. He was dragged before Theodosius and executed immediately. His head was reportedly displayed before his own retreating soldiers. Arbogast, seeing everything lost, fled into the nearby mountains. Rather than face capture, he ended his own life there. With his enemies dead, Theodosius stood completely victorious. For the first time in years, one man ruled everything. Both Eastern and Western Rome answered to him alone. It would be the very last time this happened. Roman unity, briefly restored, would never return again. Theodosius used his victory to accelerate Christian reforms further. He extinguished the sacred fire inside the Temple of Vesta. He disbanded the ancient order of Vestal Virgins entirely. He also helped suppress the ancient Olympic Games themselves. Centuries of pagan tradition were being dismantled rapidly now. Rome's old gods had lost their final political champion. Theodosius did not enjoy his victory for very long. Less than a year later, he died suddenly. His empire was immediately split between his two sons. The west went to young Honorius, still just a child. The east went to his brother Arcadius instead. Neither son possessed his father's strength or ability. The unified empire Theodosius had briefly created fractured again. This time, it would never be fully whole again. Within decades, the Western Empire began its final decline. Historians still view Frigidus as a genuine turning point. It marked paganism's last real military stand against Christianity. After this battle, Rome's ancient religion had no army left. It survived only quietly in scattered private households. The storm that blinded Eugenius's men became powerful legend afterward. Whether miracle or simple coincidence, its effect was undeniable. In one violent afternoon, an old world ended completely. A new, thoroughly Christian empire rose from its ashes.